Before the men were able to render service to their country, they first had to pass a physical examination.
The men recruiting these armies, the recruiting physicians, if you will, in many cases were local MDs who had just been hired by the Army to do these physical exams. In many cases, they were under political pressure to let as many men through as possible, because each regiment, each small town was trying to compete with the town 5 miles down the road to raise their regiment first. We do have evidence of some recruitment physicians being thrown in jail for treason because they, in fact, exempted too many men.
The doctor looked at me and said, "Young man, you cannot go. You're not fit to be a soldier." I begged of him and told him of the days I had drilled and how much work I had done. The colonel finally asked my age, state of health, if my father was living, and if my mother was willing to let me go. I answered his questions. He said, "Put your name down. You can go." The doctor inquired if he should examine me, but the colonel said no, very decidedly. Then the doctor said, "Why, Colonel, he will be in the hospital in a week, and we shall have to send him home." "Well," said the colonel, "we shall send him home then." I was happy. Elijah Hunt Rhodes, 19 years old.
Some surgeons did follow the rules and looked carefully at the health of the men, but many, many of them didn't. Probably the best example, or the best way to illustrate this, is that we now know that several hundreds, if not perhaps thousands, of women served in the armies of both the North and the South without being noticed on their physical exam, which shows how thorough it was to begin with.
I must tell you that we got a female sesh here. She was wounded at Gettysburg, but our doctors soon found her out. I have not seen her, but they say she is very good looking. The poor girl has lost a leg. It is a great pity she did not stay at home with her mother. Union soldier at Army General Hospital in Chester, Pennsylvania, July 1863.
As these young men move into these camp settings, the camps are set up in very close living quarters. 10, 12, in some cases 20 men are going to be put into one large tent. The tents are going to be tightly packed together. You now have a lot of young men with very close interaction with others. It's important to realize that most men in the Civil War period, and most individuals, lived in a rural area, in a rural environment. In many cases, these young men came from farms where they would have had very little contact with others beyond their family members. They may have gone into a local town on the weekends, but have been in contact with maybe 100 or 200 other people during their lives. Now, for the first time in their lives, they're put together with literally thousands and thousands of other young men from all areas of the country. The very first thing they begin to do is share germs. These young men, we now know, looking back, can say, had really not fully developed their immune systems. They had never, in many cases, been exposed to a lot of the infectious diseases, so they had built up no immunity. And they then were very, very likely to develop these diseases as soon as they came in contact with other individuals carrying the various microbes. We began to see in these early camps of instructions massive outbreaks of measles, mumps, diphtheria, what would now be known as, really, and were known then as, childhood diseases. But these were young men who had never been exposed to them before. This epidemic of childhood diseases literally decimated the regiments in the first few weeks of camp. It was not at all unusual to have regimental strength down by about 60%. 60% of 1,000 means about 400, 500, 600 men are ill with these childhood diseases. And while we nowadays look back on these diseases as being just minor blips in childhood, a few days of illness, these were not just sickening diseases, they were deadly.